Hi, everyone, and welcome. We're so glad you're here. Today, we're discussing what it looks like to build and activate a community-wide culture of data. You'll hear directly from leaders about their data strategy, bright spots, opportunities, and what advice they have for others looking to do similar work. I'm Makenzie Mosby, a network advisor with StriveTogether. I have the privilege of partnering closely with Chattanooga 2.0 as they use data to drive change for youth and families in Chattanooga, Tennessee. In my role, I support their team with strategy, peer learning, and connections across the Cradle-to-Career network, a national network of community partnerships working to ensure every young person has a clear path to economic mobility. Today's conversation is about their approach to data use in their work, the strategies, partnerships, and systems they've built to drive results. We're joined by an incredible group of leaders from Chattanooga 2.0, Dr. Sonia Stewart, Executive Director, Jennifer Andrews, Director of Early Childhood Strategies, and Rachel Kramer, Director of Data Strategy and Impact. Throughout the live, we invite you to drop your questions in the chat. Our team will be monitoring and answering as many as we can in real time. To get us started, I'll turn it over to the Chattanooga 2.0 team, Dr. Stewart, Jennifer, and Rachel to ground us in Chattanooga 2.0's work before we dive into the discussion.
Thank you, Makenzie. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to be with you here this afternoon and share the work that is happening here at Chattanooga 2.0. We'll start with just a little bit about ourselves. So Chattanooga 2.0, we are a place-based cradle-to-career organization, like so many of you, working across sectors, trying to work for that multi-generational change with an ultimate goal of improving economic opportunity and access for all of our young people within our community. Just a little bit about us. We are located in Southeast Tennessee, so we are right in between Nashville and Atlanta, right smack dab in the middle. A little bit about our history. In the late 1960s, Walter Cronkite, there was a story where he announced that Chattanooga was the dirtiest city in the country. And I think in some ways that put on the map this need for us to reconsider who we were. And it forced us to start to look at the conditions, the living conditions of what was happening in our community. Fast forward several years, in 2015, Chattanooga 2.0 began, and we started out of a collaboration between two of our local philanthropic foundations, the school system and our Chamber of Commerce, and we started to really address a workforce issue. And at that time in 2015, there was a report published that was kind of like a scathing report of the conditions and really brought us to bear as an organization who thought we could live in a space where we acted as a convener to try to have some of those tougher conversations for our community. If you've never been to Chattanooga or Hamilton County, we're this beautiful community that sits with ridges and rivers. But we often say that the conditions of our kids and families and communities vary quite a bit. We joke amongst ourselves that the economic attainment rises as you rise. So those on the mountains and the ridges tend to have lots of economic mobility, while many of our families that are in the city and sort of in those lower lands don't. And we really believe that Chattanooga needs to be a place that really, really works for everyone. Hamilton County is complex. We serve a district of 45,000 kids that have an urban core, a suburban ring, and a rural north. And so the politics are really complex as well. And so having a convening organization like Chattanooga 2.0 that brings together all those stakeholders is really essential to move the work forward in our space. This is who we are. We like to say we're a scrappy group of people. Jennifer Andrews is on our call today, and she'll be talking in just a few minutes, but she's been around almost since our origin. We've grown pretty rapidly in this cradle to career space and continue to believe that we are well positioned to do this work. But I'm excited about this conversation today because data has really driven much of this expansion of this team as we continue to create these proof points within our community. This is how we're organized. There in the middle is our backbone organization. That's us, those puzzle pieces. But we, just like many of you, are a combination of working groups and action teams and councils. And what you see here on the left side, our advisory councils the strongest sort of governance piece that we have. But you see right under that the data council, and we have them positioned there because they inform all that work below. We have really centered data as a critical part of the work that we are doing. And these are our goals. Against all of our, we're organized with big bets. We've got 4 big bets, one in early childhood, one in literacy. We have the Chattanooga Future Fund, which is a college and career savings account, and viable pathways. And our goals are aligned to those big bets. You see kindergarten readiness there on the left, coming soon. Jennifer Andrews has worked really hard to create an indicator around kindergarten readiness. And so that'll come, but this is the data that we are tracking. I always think it's important on slides like this to know this is the big D data, but as many of you know, it's the continuous smaller cycles of data that really inform our work. And so we report on this, but there's lots in that data landscape that really informs what we do every single day. Our approach, again, like many of you, we're place-based, really looking for those proof points and that continuous improvement. The evidence informed, just consistently looking to research to drive what it is that we do. That data, impact and focused, that continuous improvement process, the rigorous analysis that happens all the time, and then making sure that we're rooted in the community. And we think a lot about how we convene those stakeholder groups, but making sure we're hearing from the grassroots and the grass tops, making sure we're hearing all of those voices in our community. And our proof point model. Again, when I think about this work, I'm fairly new to Chattanooga 2.0. I'm very new. I'm only 2 months in. But this slide right here, I think really represents the success of the work that has occurred over the last 10 years, and particularly in these last 3 years, where there's a strategy that is identified. We implement that strategy and look very quickly for a proof point. We measure, we identify data that's going to move the work, and then we scale and sustain, or we stop doing it. And I think this right here has driven the work, the acceleration in Chattanooga 2.0's work, as well as the trust that's built within our community. And you're going to hear a lot more of that from our team today. I'll hand it over to Rachel Kramer. She's a game changer for us on our team. She's our Director of Data Strategy and Impact, and I'm excited for her to get to share the great work that she's been doing.
Thank you, Dr. Stewart, for that Hamilton County Chattanooga 2.0 overview. So on this slide, we have our data strategy. And really the key pieces of this are data shaped strategy from the very beginning. We also want to make sure our partners are quick to use their data in their day-to-day decision making. We work to be really intentional about making data something that's shared across the community, not just held by one organization. And at the end of the day, we want to make sure that data is more than just something that's reported, but it is a tool that is actively used to drive decisions and improve outcomes. So we have broken our data strategy up into 3 data pillars: goals and program evaluation, data accessibility and data sharing, and stakeholder engagement. So for program evaluation, this is really about accountability, holding ourselves accountable, making sure that we're able to communicate a program's value to stakeholders and funding. It's about improvement and learning. We want to be able to identify strengths and areas for improvement and determine what's working and why. And then we use it for decision making. The results that we get from these program evaluations inform plans to scale and sustain programming or stop programming if we're not seeing the results we had hoped for. I'm also going to run through a couple quick screenshots of our dashboard. We'll talk more about dashboards later, but just so that you have them in your mind when we're diving more deeply into them. So this is a screenshot from our 2030 goals dashboard. We have our contributing and contextual indicators on here to help provide additional context to the trends we're seeing in the data. We're also able to disaggregate to make sure that we're able to get the full story behind the data. And then we have this why it matters and data insight section so that a user is immediately able to come to this dashboard and see what they're looking at, what's important, and what they should take away. I mentioned those contextual and contributing indicators on the prior slide. So we had lots of stakeholder involvement in building this dashboard, and our data council was really key in defining those contextual and contributing indicators. They brought important knowledge from their sectors to help us determine which were the right indicators to include, and it also helped build long-term buy-in for that dashboard. This is a screenshot, I know it's small, but of our children and youth fiscal map, where you can easily see how much we spend on children and youth across the county. There's a key takeaway box up in that top left corner. And the key takeaway is that majority of spending comes from the school system. So if you remove that spending, we can see the drop off of what's spent on children and youth. And our children's cabinet was a key stakeholder in helping us visualize this data. They were the ones who said, like, let's make sure we can pull out the school district funding so that it's really clear how much is being spent on children and youth without the school district. We had many county and state partners involved in this sharing of data to make this dashboard possible. And next, I'm going to pass it over to Jennifer to talk about some of the data work in the early childhood space.
Thank you, Rachel. So as the Director of Early Childhood Strategies, we are convening early childhood partners across that early childhood health, learning, and family supports sectors all together. And we convene the highest level of child serving organizations on our Hamilton County Children's Cabinet. It's co-chaired by the county mayor, city mayor, and superintendent of public schools. And as they were, one of the topics they were focused on was nutrition for young children. And so in the early childhood space, one of the greatest ways to ensure, I think most of you all probably know, the greatest way to ensure that children are getting enough fruits and vegetables and healthy nutrition is the WIC program. But there's not a lot of insight locally into where there are gaps in signup. So we know where people are utilizing and signed up and registered for WIC, but we didn't have any insight into where families were presumptively eligible for WIC. And so Rachel led this amazing project to map for our community-wide leaders where there is high eligibility but low enrollment in the WIC dashboard. And that enabled our leaders to make some data-driven decisions on where they would increase recruitment and enrollment for the WIC program. Another example from early childhood of how we have used data is the child care seat count. So in Tennessee specifically, we don't have, all we've ever known is the number of licensed seats. And without getting too in the weeds about early childhood and child care, you know that just because you're licensed for a certain number of seats, that doesn't mean that that's how many children you would actually serve in your child care center. It has to do with ratios. And so we were always kind of flying blind. And so when Rachel came on the team, we set out to figure out exactly how many seats we realistically have in Hamilton County. And once we figured out that number, we're then able to go after an increase in the number of childcare seats. It's kind of like when you know better, you do better. And so now we know what our starting point is. But not only just the number of seats, we did surveys of providers, and we're able to understand that we're actually serving a lot more kids under 3, and we have a lot fewer seats for 3 and 4-year-olds, but that really we only have enough childcare seats for 30% of our county, which is better than some counties in the rest of Tennessee, but it does give us a more accurate understanding. And then further, the next iteration of that early childhood work around childcare is actually, the previous slide is a screenshot of our cost of care, childcare cost study for Hamilton County. So we did further in-depth studies with our surveys with our childcare providers and directors to understand exactly how much does it cost to provide childcare compared to what families are actually being charged, so that we understand that gap and can then again build on public funding for childcare. An additional way that we have used data for the early childhood space is just by equipping elected officials. So this is a day on the Hill picture on the left where we went up to the Tennessee State Legislature in Nashville. And kind of what we do is equip those legislators with both the data and the qualitative and the quantitative data for early childhood. So we had both, do you know how many children are in your district? Do you know what hunger, how many children are facing food insecurity, what the mental health score is like? And so we put together a data sheet for them to show them what some of our early childhood priorities were within our Early Matters Early Childhood Action Team. But then we also collected testimonies with the support of community partners and videos that were recorded by our child care providers who couldn't go to the Hill and put together a leave behind there. So it's both the qualitative and the quantitative that we are equipping legislators with so that our state level leaders can make those data informed decisions as well. And then the last, let's see, is there one more slide, Rachel? Is that it? Oh, just kidding. That's it.
Well, thank you all so much for that overview. I think will really ground us and help us contextualize the rest of our conversation. And, we know in this work, we're always busy. And so for those folks who were only able to jump on for the first 30 minutes, they were able to get some nuggets of of the work and kind of your vision and are able to come back and watch the recording. So thanks so much for really grounding us in that context. Before we jump into the specific components of your data strategy, you all recently celebrated this milestone anniversary of 10 years of systems change work in Hamilton County. And so just, paint this picture for us, really give us the context of what has been the impact of the partnership in Chattanooga across Hamilton County. How has the community and kind of the work of the partnership evolved over the last decade?
Yeah, so I'll take this one. So as Dr. Stewart described, Chattanooga 2.0 was created in 2015, and I have been here for 9 years of that. And really, the first half of Chattanooga 2.0's existence was the practice of convening community partners across sectors. It was a lot of convening and having nonpartisan meetings kind of across the aisle and trying to figure out where there were gaps in the community for early childhood, K-12, and post-secondary. And then the second half of Chattanooga 2.0's existence has really been standing in those gaps because there's only so much that you can ask your nonprofit partners in the community to do until they are beyond capacity. And so we began to understand that things like kindergarten readiness and data were a gap in the landscape of Hamilton County. And so Rachel is one of the first positions that we hired when we started to grow the team because that is something we knew we could add value to for the community. A specific example is the limitations that we had to increasing kindergarten readiness, because at the time we didn't really have a kindergarten ready metric. And so we worked across sectors with community partners to come to an aligned definition of what kindergarten readiness is. And then the school district began to administer an entrance screener that is then reshared. So now we're able to understand geographically and by skills where children need more support in the kindergarten readiness area, and then work on that as community partners in the early childhood space. Similarly, we wanted to increase the number of childcare seats, but we didn't know how many we had. So it's really the second half of Chattanooga 2.0's existence has really been to increase our internal data capacity so that we could accelerate the work and add capacity to the community from a data perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. And what a call to action. I love this language that you're using of like the second half of that decade was really thinking about how do we stand in the gaps? And one of the ways that you all saw to be able to do that was just, deepen this data capacity. And so, Rachel, let's get into it. You gave us that little preview of the data strategy, those 3 pillars. Walk us through and give us some depth there about how you're thinking about the data strategy, those 3 pillars, and really how it will advance or how it's already advancing the work of Chattanooga 2.0.
Yeah, definitely. So, that broad data strategy is really that data should be at the front of all of our birth to career strategies, and that information should be easily accessible and widely shared so that community leaders, public officials, residents can make evidence-based decisions together. So we have those three pillars to help us make that a reality. And so goals and program evaluation, data accessibility and data sharing, and then that stakeholder engagement. And so through the goals and program evaluation, we run programs and we set clear outcome goals and key performance indicators, and then we're conducting regular reviews of those programs, both to hold ourselves accountable, but also to build trust with the community, to share those key findings with partners and the community. And then we're able to identify what's working, refine strategies, and maximize our impact across our priority areas. Without those evaluations, we wouldn't be able to know what's working and why it's working and who it's impacting. So that's a really key part of our data strategy. Next is that accessibility and sharing piece. We work to maintain a comprehensive and data-driven list of initiatives that are happening across the county so that we can support our partners in their work. That's, conducting root cause analyses, uncovering opportunities for improvement, and then ensuring that there's shared sense of measurement across organizations. Jennifer's speaking to that. We didn't have an shared understanding of kindergarten readiness. And that was something that we needed the whole community to come together to make a decision on, because if we all had separate definitions, we wouldn't be able to track progress towards a goal. Along in that data accessibility and sharing, we also maintain data sharing agreements with partners at both the local and the state level, which allows for timely and relevant information to be shared. And then lastly, that stakeholder engagement piece. So that's both our partners in our data council or our children's cabinet, but also youth and community voice. So we've had youth participatory action research teams. We're launching a youth advisory council. And then we have our data council, which I know we'll talk more about, but really making sure that we're both bringing the community together and hearing the voices of people who are most impacted by the strategies that we're running.
Yeah, thanks for that overview. A really robust strategy that you all are activating for Chattanooga 2.0. And the way that you all are activating that is you have some really clear systems, infrastructure, resourcing that you're able to have in place to activate that strategy. And so would love to hear you all talk about some of those pieces, what infrastructure, resources, and talent were necessary to build and sustain your data strategy. And we can spend a little bit of time too talking about your data council. Really appreciated that visual, Dr. Stewart, of how throughout the overview, you all showed that data research and evidence-based decision-making is this kind of central through line, and that visual of the partnership, really centering the data council just underscores that. And so would love to learn more about how the data council supports the work of Chattanooga 2.0.
Yeah, our data council includes partners from education space, government, nonprofits, and business who work with data in their day-to-day jobs. And the goal of that, it has multiple goals, but one of the big reasons for that council is to establish this culture of data sharing, trust, and collective action through the council. And the council has been really crucial in helping us set our data strategy and then building buy-in through by returning back to their organizations and growing that trust. And I mentioned briefly the data council was instrumental in helping us select our contributing and contextual indicators for our dashboard. They bring expertise and knowledge from their sectors to help us select what are the right metrics to include there. And then it also built that additional buy-in for the goals dashboard. I think another key piece is that all of our directors across our organization are really data driven, and they look at all their work through a data lens. And so that's key to making sure that data stays at the front of our strategies. So, I may be a data team of one, but I have really great partners in the work at Chattanooga 2.0 who are also thinking about data every day to make sure that we remain a data-driven organization.
Thanks, Rachel. And Dr. Stewart, you're, as the executive director, I'm sure you're thinking about talent across the board, but are there things that you would share specifically about how to recruit and retain and invest in, data specific talent?
Yeah, it doesn't go without saying here that Rachel has been a key component to our data strategy, and Jennifer's already mentioned it. She was one of an early hire, and I think for those that are thinking about their organization and accelerants, getting the talent that you need in this space, I think, is critical to that space. And so, identifying and finding talent. Candidly, we found Rachel. She was working at a state partner, and you know how you get to know people along the way, and you start to recruit, and so identifying her early and somebody who could partner with us at Chattanooga 2.0 was really important. But we've really also invested in Rachel. She right now is a fellow at the Strategic Data Project Fellowship at Harvard, a 2-year program. And it's one of those things where she's learning and she's translating for us that learning and making us better and building our capacity as an organization. So as we invest in her, she's continuing to invest deeply in the work that we do. And truly, this is a capacity building, but it's also a retention strategy. She's going to be with us throughout that fellowship and long after, if I have anything to do with it. And so really making sure that your data people feel highly valued, I think, is important, because finding that quality in this space is really important. I think the last thing I would just echo, and Rachel's already said it, is that we believe the ability to know how to analyze and use data, to talk about data, to bring the right people to the table about data is really important. And so our directors are in that space, and we have that expectation of them. And you can kind of see it's iron sharpening iron as they are thought partners together, where Rachel's asking the right questions and others are talking about the conversations they want to be having. And I think together we're just mutually strengthening our entire data approach by having this high capacity talent in the seat of the data strategy director, but also our directors of our other big bets able to really articulate the need for data use and have that strong collaboration with Rachel as well.
I love that. It's really the community-wide culture of data is not just external, but internal. And there are some pieces that you need to be doing to ensure that your team is equipped for their kind of side of that. So really appreciate those thoughts, Dr. Stewart. Rachel, want to dig a little deeper into some of the resourcing pieces of the data strategy. You mentioned data sharing agreements, and we know that is a hot topic with place-based partnerships and in the StriveTogether network. And so I really want you to talk about how you went about building buy-in to establish those DSAs with your key partners. How did you decide who needed to be, in that DSA agreement? What challenges you ran into, and any strategies to kind of overcome some of those.
Yeah. I may start to sound like a broken record, but keep coming back to that trust piece. Sharing data can be really scary, and that's because data can be weaponized. We've seen it be weaponized before. So you really have to have those trusting relationships in place as the foundation to those data sharing agreements. But also being really clear about what you plan to use any data for that you're asking for. We emphasize that we're asking for this data because we're working for children and youth, and whatever we're asking for, the focus is on how can we improve the lives of children and youth in Hamilton County, Tennessee. And that, any gaps that we surface, there's no finger pointing. It's about, again, how do we work together as a community to better support children and youth in Hamilton County? I think another key to this data sharing agreement work has been that we've positioned ourselves as added data capacity for organizations, really emphasizing we know organizations are really busy. People have a lot on their to-do list. They have a lot going on. They may have thoughts and ideas and analyses they want to dig into in their data and just keeps getting knocked down the to-do list, and saying like, hey, we'd love to support you in that. And, that makes these data sharing agreements less of a one-way street and more of that two-way street in collaboration and partnership. And I think that's been really key to establishing these DSAs. And then, there's a kind of an interesting piece around like, when do you formalize a DSA versus the informal work? And I think we've sort of framed it as like, the time to formalize those DSAs is when you need the data to do more than it's already doing for you. How can you use that data to drive action? And if you're not doing it yet, it's probably time for that formal DSA. And I think a good example of that is in the out of school time space. We've been working with our out of school time providers really around quality standards. We've done some self-assessment. We've done some youth surveys, staff surveys. But we're getting to this point now where we're looking for that data to do more. And that's when we're ready to start formalizing those data sharing agreements with them.
Yeah, no, that is a really helpful context and foundation to start to think about not necessarily a rubric, but how do you start to move the work forward? You're really outlining some of these key and central components of how you know that you're ready to formalize that data agreement, but what's needed even before you get to that signed document, kind of what are the pieces that need to be in place. And so continuing to talk about your partners, elevating your out of school time partners in the conversation, I'm really curious about what preparation or how are you equipping kind of community, your partners, and systems leaders to engage and leverage data for the outcomes improvement. You also talked about, standing up a youth council, a youth data council soon. And so just really curious how you're integrating community, the youth and family voices into your data strategy.
Yeah, I think helpful to sort of think about the evolution of our data work, and that we really started with, what's our belief about data? It's not just a technical tool, it's a community asset. And then that trust building, keep coming back to it. But again, in order to build this community-wide culture of data, we needed to have trust first before we could push any use of the data. And, that meant being really transparent, consistent, and willing to acknowledge what the data showed, even if it was difficult. So an example of that is we launched 2 tutoring pilot programs, different models at different schools, ran program evaluations for those. And both at the mid-year and end-of-year program evaluations, we were seeing one of the models had really strong results, and the other model had pretty modest to mid results. And we made the decision to shut down the program that we weren't seeing the results we hoped for, and we scaled up the program where we saw strong results. And I think this was an indicator to the community. We're going to honestly evaluate our programs. We're not afraid to say if something's not working. And, that built a lot of trust. People were able to see, hey, they're really honest with their data. Next up was kind of a shared infrastructure and shared ownership, and that comes through systems like our data council, through Jennifer's work around kindergarten readiness. How are we making sure we're all on the same page? Before we can do anything, we need to be on the same page about our data work across the community. And then it's really tempting to just like hand data over to folks and say, here, like do something with this. But we want to make sure that folks are actually equipped to use the data, not just receive the data. So, that's making sure that we're supporting partners in the data conversation, in the root cause analysis, in the gap analysis. And our directors are really great about doing that with their working groups and their councils. And then I'm actually going to kick it over to Dr. Stewart. I think she has a great example of our children's cabinet and sort of their evolution of working through this building a culture of data. They're kind of a prime example.
Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, so we have made it a priority to include data in every single children's cabinet, just constantly building the capacity of the people in the room to look at the data regularly to try to define what's happening and what's being done about it, and really be honest with ourselves about what we're seeing. A great example of how data has really driven change on the children's cabinet is a couple of years ago, our mayors identified youth violence as one of their priorities. They really wanted to see a reduction in youth violence. And Chattanooga 2.0 stepped into that space and really started to ask questions about what is the root cause of youth violence. It's so big. Like, what could we really be looking at to try to see what's really driving this, and try to get underneath this, so to speak. And so we began to have conversations about, well, does it have something to do with how kids are interacting in school? And could it have any connections with chronic absenteeism? Let's take a look at that. And so we started to dig into the chronic absenteeism data from the county school system. And we were bringing that regularly. And naturally the question came up of like, well, who are our most chronically absent kids and what's happening with them? And of course, we identified that our most chronically absent kids are kids that are experiencing homelessness. And so we began to get all the way from, youth violence to, is there some correlation to our young people that are experiencing homelessness? And we stood up a pilot and we started to ask the question, like, can we do anything around this youth homelessness space in our county? And we stood up a pilot where we identified who our kids were that are experiencing homelessness. We drove some intervention towards them through our school system and started to track, if we piloted with a smaller group, can we reduce chronic absenteeism, and what might that do writ large? And what we found very quickly was that we were able to really move the needle. We were able to see a significant reduction in chronic absenteeism with that small group of kids, and we were able to identify what was driving it. And what we saw in their data was they were coming to school more. Their behaviors were decreasing, their incidence of behaviors were decreasing, all the things that you would want to see, right? And that particular pilot was an 18-month pilot that stood up. It has moved our children's cabinet to seek additional resources outside of the cabinet, and we are expanding our ending youth homelessness work. In fact, there was just a vote last night in our city council to expand the funding and to stand up a broader access to homelessness shelter, the transitional housing space, all because we were able to follow the data and start with youth violence and say, well, what is underneath this? Then we identified something underneath it, and then we introduced sort of a response to that, and we tracked the data over time, and it's going to result in hundreds of kids having access to housing and transitioning into more stable housing. It's really significant.
Yeah. When we have data, what data can do, right? To be able to unearth, surface trends, and then be able to respond and craft interventions towards those. We have a question from our audience. And so really thinking about what's possible when partners have the capacity to analyze, to share data with you. I'm curious, we have a question from the audience. What happens on the other side of that? So, sometimes organizations don't have the capacity to analyze their own data, or they don't have those systems in place to share data. How have you all worked through that? And what would you share with community leaders, who are currently kind of working to overcome some of those challenges?
I can jump in to start. It's definitely a big challenge, and I think an example for us here is in the out of school time space. And this is where I think we turn to our proof point model, in that we can't do it for everyone across the county to start, but we need to show the value. And so, this summer, for the second summer, we're running our OST data pilot, and it's about helping OST partners gather more data, and then it's actually on us at Chattanooga 2.0 to do that analysis, because they don't have the time, resources, or capacity. But we're making that a priority because we know the importance of it long term. And then we're able to say, maybe to funders, to other community partners, like, this is really important work, here's why, here's what we're seeing, with the hopes of then scaling and sustaining to more partners. So, if I were to sort of sum that up, I think it has to be some of the backbone organization doing that work, but it doesn't have to be, like, it's one bite at a time, so that we can then grow the strategy more broadly. And Dr. Stewart, I just saw you come off mute, so I want to let you jump in.
Yeah, I think the other thing I would say here is that, and Rachel's alluded to this already, there's a lot of organizations that have data, right? And so partnering with other organizations with their data and doing some sense making with them and for them and making that visible. I think our mental well-being dashboard is a really good example of this. Rachel utilized a report, right? And drilled down, right? She utilized a report using these indicators that are statewide indicators and drilled down to it by zip code in our space to make it actionable in our context, right? She didn't drive all that data herself. She found that data and created the visualization and the tool that helped other people use it. And so I think there's something there too about leveraging the data systems that people do have, and how do you use those data systems to also enhance sort of your visualization within your community and support the needs of your community.
No, I really appreciate the multiple components that you all are sharing when you are engaging partners who, to your point, Dr. Stewart, have the work or have the data, excuse me, or Rachel, to your point, are integral to a strategy and need to be invested into why we want to look at data this way. So I appreciate kind of both of those components, and hopefully to our audience that was helpful in supporting you kind of, and maybe an additional strategy to kind of overcome some of those challenges. Well, moving deeper into our conversation, a really rich information that you all are sharing with us. Want to talk about another tool that you all have leveraged in an incredible way, the public dashboards that you all have. I share these constantly with the folks who are in my portfolio, so they are an incredible tool. And I really just you highlighted the contextual and contributing indicators that you share to really make sure that you're telling the right story with the data. And so I'm curious, how do you ensure that the data is leveraged to tell the right story as folks are using those dashboards?
I think that something that's so important to name about dashboards is that you got to go in with a clear purpose. What's the purpose of this dashboard? I think we're at a time when dashboards are like exciting, they're shiny, people want to put out a lot of dashboards, but dashboards are only as good as they are able to be used for decision making, for tracking, and so just being really clear about what your goal is for a dashboard. And so, our 2030 goals dashboard is about holding ourselves accountable for our work and to track the community's progress over time. We did a lot of user testing and intentionality around making sure that the dashboard was easily accessible and digestible, and not just to be used by data folks, but to be used by anyone across the community. We disaggregate to make sure we're able to see the full story. We have those contextual and contributing indicators. And then another really key piece to our dashboards is that we're using them to drive decision making, and that when we make a decision to implement a new strategy or shift a current strategy, that the results should be showing up in that dashboard over time. Like, we better be able to use that dashboard to track what's happening if that dashboard is used to make decisions. Those dashboards are a key piece of that continuous improvement and collaborative improvement cycle. Really, it's not just a checkbox item. So I think that can sometimes get left behind when we're thinking about dashboards.
Yeah, really thinking about the role of the dashboard throughout the work, not just to surface the problem, but how are we leveraging this throughout kind of the continuous improvement cycle in the strategy. So appreciate those thoughts, Rachel. Jennifer, want to bring you back into the conversation to continue to think about how the data strategy has deepened the early child care work. You shared in the overview that this work has been scaled up to the state. With the Day on the Hill, you all have been able to calculate the child care seats, doing some work to understand average local wage for child care teachers. I'm curious, what's next in terms of using data to impact change in the early childhood space?
Thanks, Makenzie. So at Chattanooga 2.0, we recognize the co-equal need to use data to both advocate at the state level and to inform the practice at the county level and equip our partners with capacity to be data informed. But one of the things that we worked on over 3 years in the early childhood space was as part of a statewide network of cities that were creating early care and education action plans for early childhood. We had kind of a set of measures that we were looking at that tie into our contributing and contextual indicators for Chattanooga 2.0. And every summer, we would get together with the early childhood partners and give them kind of a data update to give them both census data update for them to react to, but also show them how we were or were not making progress on that set of measures. And at the end of that 3-year report, what we found is that, when doing work at the county level, we were not really seeing the compound impact of a set of strategies impacting the same cohort of children, if you will. So yes, we had countywide strategies, but they might be taken up. Different programs might be participated in by children from all over the county. But what we found is that we really wanted to then drill down even deeper at the neighborhood level. And so the next thing that we're kind of working on actively at the moment is the collaborative neighborhood approach, where we have two tracks. We've got our early childhood partners who are coming together as they normally do, but they are examining how they do or do not show up in a particular zip code. And then we also have created a neighborhood parent council. The neighborhood that we chose is Alton Park, and we chose that in a data-informed way. So as has been discussed, Rachel created this mental well-being dashboard that shows of the various census tracts in our county, where there are high scores and low scores. And Alton Park has the second to lowest mental well-being score of any census tract in the state of Tennessee. And there's something locally called the Tale of Two Chattanoogas that our city mayor talks about. And it's because just 2 miles away at the top of the mountain, you have the highest mental well-being score in the state of Tennessee. And so at the top of the mountain and the bottom of the mountain is just these two communities who are experiencing things completely differently. And so we decided as early childhood partners to go deep in this one zip code at the foot of the mountain. And to answer the previous question about how we're helping organizations who don't have data capacity, over the 10 years, we also have universities locally that serve on Rachel's data council, and they are looking to help also build some data capacity of community partners. And so the very most basic thing that we're doing is saying, do you currently track programmatic data at the zip code level? Could you be able to share that I serve 20 families in this zip code? Or is it that you only collect information at the county level? And so that's a very, it seems like a simple question, but when we have 50 different early childhood partners, getting more partners to be able to understand and begin to collect zip code level data from their program participants, that is systems change. So that's one thing we're doing in early childhood. And then simultaneously, we're working with parents on a neighborhood parent council in this zip code, where the parents are kind of doing strengths and gaps and challenges of what it's like for young children. And so The parent council is then able to share their feedback with the early childhood partners as they figure out how they can better not create new programs, but just serve a zip code more effectively so that we can just strengthen the early childhood system in one neighborhood. Secondly, in terms of what we are doing moving forward, we are beginning to equip local elected officials with their district-specific data. So we've done state level, and one of the things that Rachel is working on with city and county partners is, we have 11 districts across the county. In this particular district, how many children do you have under the age of 5? What is the poverty level? What is food insecurity like? Across all of the early childhood sectors, kind of giving them a picture of what life is like for the children in their district, because it's not something that they're equipped with the second that they take office. So that's kind of what's new and upcoming for early childhood when it comes to data.
Thanks, Jennifer. What I'm really hearing is this replication of the civic infrastructure that you all have built at the city level, the kind of regional level, replicating that down to the neighborhood level. So that's across data, across that shared vision, across the collaborative action, really thinking about a different unit of scale to only strengthen all of the work that you all are doing. Dr. Stewart, please. Oh, okay. Yes, sorry about that. Just saw the mic come off. You all have some really powerful examples and wins in your outcome areas around how data has advanced that work. Another area that we've talked a little bit about, the OST or out of school time work, you all recently received an investment from the Wallace Foundation to continue to deepen that work. And so just really curious, Rachel's talked about it a little bit, but Dr. Stewart, how are you all leveraging data in that space?
I think I want to start out by saying, I think getting that Wallace grant, being identified nationally as potentially ready for that kind of investment is really rooted in our data approach, right? We got to that investment by already having relationships in out of school time, by creating like program locators and like a benefit to the community that they began to trust us and use us for some things. We were giving them sort of a value add. And then Rachel's already pointed this out. Like we co-constructed these quality standards. They were doing a self-assessment. We stood up these pilots where they agreed to gather data from young people. And this year they're gathering data from their staff. All of that is building trust, but it's also building a data culture where we're able to do this continuous improvement work that I think situated us well to get that Wallace investment. Now, with the investment, we are really pivoting strongly in elevating youth voice and really utilizing our youth as the researchers. Just right now, we are doing an analysis of our communities around that out of school time, those out of school time experiences and programs for our young people. We've stood up a youth advisory council. We've got 40 young people, 6th through 10th grade, who have designed research questions on their own. They were trying to figure out, how do we figure out what's going on in our community, what the barriers are, how do we get adults to listen to us? So they stood up these amazing research questions. They took 13 days and they went out and did one-on-ones with other young people. Some of them held their own focus groups. They were like, it's too much time to talk one-on-one. I'm going to sit a whole group down. And they came back after 13 days with more than 400 pieces of qualitative data, answering the question of what's missing in our community, answering the question of like what drives belonging for them, and what makes them feel listened to by adults. It's this really powerful data set. And that data set is going to lay right next to, we're doing other focus groups with different youth. So we're going to hear some of that data, just youth voice, bringing that in. And then we're doing a third data gathering space with a youth photo voice activity that in the state of Tennessee, you can't directly survey students in schools. That's a policy through the legislature. So we always have to go find other ways to get data. So we're using this photo voice activity to get data from kids in these communities. And what I hope you're seeing is that there's going to be this triangulation, right? There's this photo voice activity, there's these focus groups that are happening, and then there's this youth advisory council that's going out and getting their own data. And what they're going to come back and do is data analysis on their own. what are the themes that we see across all these three data types? What do we know now? What do we not know now? And we're even getting into the quantitative space a little bit. If 65% of the respondents are girls, what might be true about their answers? And it's really, we're building their capacity to understand what they're hearing. And ultimately, we're going to use that data and these young people to start speaking to power candidly. We want to put them in front of the city council. We want to put them in front of the mayor, where they're saying, this is what I have experienced in my community, and this is what I'm hearing others say. And we're getting at it a lot of different ways. And so really finding ways to elevate that youth voice, but it really started with us demonstrating the capacity to bring people on board in that data space. It's been really exciting.
What a rich answer, starting with how the investment came to you all, but really this through line of like, and the children will lead us. The children will lead the way, and you all are really building infrastructure for that to be true and to be possible. We only have a couple of more minutes, and I could talk to y'all all day, but I want to get to two pieces. One, something that a lot of place-based partnerships, folks who are in this backbone role are navigating. And then second, just a last piece of advice that you have for folks in this kind of data work. So I want you to wrap your kind of responses up in one, but really thinking about, oftentimes backbones are navigating this kind of complexity of we're all working together towards this aligned result, but we may be operating different programmings to get to that shared result. And so how do you all think about this kind of concept of like taking credit? How do you all navigate that to ensure that, folks feel valued, represented, and all of the parts are kind of contributing to the whole? And then also tell us your one piece of advice that you have for folks in this work.
Jennifer, do you want to jump in on the taking credit piece, and then we'll jump into challenges and advice?
Yeah, I think so. So we only have a couple of formal data sharing agreements with larger entities. And then we've been doing collaborative work with nonprofits and other organizations for the last 10 years. And it is almost the plight of a collective impact backbone that you are moving work that other people, like you're bringing people together, and then you report on work that it wasn't you who actually did the work. You didn't run the program. You weren't the boots on the ground who actually can own that data piece. And so accountable communications for this shared work is really important. We learned a few lessons early on about coming out and saying that people who had been bought into the work of Chattanooga 2.0, just saying Chattanooga 2.0 celebrates the fact that this milestone has been hit without naming partners was a big no-no, because we're not taking credit. And so we try to intentionally name partners who have been a part of this along the way. And we're also seeing other community organizations do that as well, naming the collaborative partners that they are working with in work. So that's one thing that we do. One piece of advice that I have, I was reflecting that there's a lot of loss in the country, and especially in early childhood work where things are so long term. There's never just a quick win, it seems like, in early childhood, but in a lot of our collective impact work. And so some years and sometimes not losing, even if you don't make gains, just not losing anything can sometimes be a win. And just kind of maintaining, not losing childcare seats, not having businesses close. And so I think that's something to keep in mind, that data that is stagnant can also be looked at as not having lost something that was valuable to the community.
Yeah, I'll jump in with the my last piece of advice, and it'll come back to those relationships and trust, and that it's about relationships first, and that you have to build your data strategy alongside the community so that there's buy-in from the get-go. And it can be really tempting to jump into the technical side of like, we want this system to do this thing, but at its core, data work is people work. And you really should be thinking about what do you want the data to do to better support your organization and your community and the people you're serving.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add is, and really building on what my team has said, is that to Jennifer's point, that sometimes the data doesn't move the way you want it to, and in fact, it can feel like maybe you're going backwards. But to really embrace the fact that people's deepening understanding of data, their questions about what's out there, what's happening, is a step forward. Even when we feel like the outcomes aren't following yet what we want it to do, building that capacity of the people around you to say, I want to use more data, I'm curious about it. That all by itself, even when the conditions of moving the work forward aren't always what we need them to be, is in fact a data point in and of itself that actually helps us move the work forward. So embrace that.
Incredible. Giving us hope, right? And what can sometimes be a challenging climate across the board in a variety of different aspects, really grounding us in forward movement. Success looks a ton of different ways. And so define what that looks like for your community and then move forward. So incredible. Just appreciate all of the your thoughts and comments just in the rich discussion. And what I hope, audience, you all are taking away is that Chattanooga 2.0 has really woven their data strategy throughout their partnerships, throughout their policy work and their practice work. I think sometimes we can really hold data and practice as that kind of the marriage between the two, but really they've done an incredible job of having a comprehensive data strategy that hits all components of their work. And so I hate to cut the conversation off, but we really just want to thank everyone for joining us today. And a special thanks to Dr. Stewart, Rachel, and Jennifer for sharing more about the work and impact of Chattanooga 2.0. StriveTogether has recently published a blog detailing Chattanooga 2.0's work and their approach to data, and we'll be dropping that link right now in the chat for you to read more about their data use. Otherwise, please stay connected with us at StriveTogether and the Cradle-to-Career Network. You can sign up for our newsletters, you can visit our new website, or you can take courses in our training hub, where we also have a learning journey about data use. The training hub provides easy to access, high quality training, grounded in proven approaches and tested by leaders across the country. They'll build your capacities because we know it takes a specific skill set to do this work, to change systems and to improve outcomes. Feel free to learn more and register at the link in the chat. And then we're also dropping some resources specific to Chattanooga 2.0's work that they have shared with us and that they want you all to leverage in your work. So thanks so much, everyone, for joining us